Welcome back, beautiful people. My name is, of course, Michael Granado. I am a history and philosophy educator, and this is sort of a series, I guess, if you want to call it, of me reviewing videos that really confuse me. If I had to title that, Confusing Videos with Michael. Anyway, today I'm going to be reviewing a conversation that was had between Candace Owens and Destiny, both of whom are more kind of, I guess, politically oriented figures, both of whom have very large followings. This is a little out of the ordinary for the type of content I normally review. I'm either usually talking about history or philosophy related stuff, but it is related to what I do as an educator. A chunk of their conversation has to deal with the value, I guess, of a college degree. And so I'm kind of going to divide this up. In this video, I'm going to be talking about this weird conversation and points that Owens specifically is bringing up with respect to literacy amongst college students, which is a really interesting topic, but the reason why she's bringing it up is because I think, not to put words in her mouth, because she never explicitly says this, but is to devalue and to degrade a college education, which theoretically one could raise some good points to do that, but the rationale behind it seems to be a very popular conservative talking point, a sort of conspiratorial idea that colleges are brainwashing people and that colleges are indoctrinating people with liberal propaganda. And so, being a college instructor myself, I figured I would respond to that for what it's worth. So, yeah, that's where we're at. This is a very short segment of the conversation leading up to this, just to give you a timestamp if you want to go watch it for yourself. I'll also give a link to the original video, not that Destiny needs any more viewers, but it starts about 44 minutes into it. For the first 44 minutes, a large portion of the conversation, they're talking about Puff Daddy and the recent trials that are taking place. Now, being a 90s kid and being a huge fan of 90s hip hop, especially, I was interested in that, which is why I started watching the video. And then it kind of shift gears about halfway through to start talking about more politically oriented stuff, which is where we're going to pick up on. And so I'll let Owens speak for herself here.
It's interesting because it feels like the most, like we would say, the most mind controlled people in America are actually like young white college kids. And those guys have lots of literacy and lots of education. So I don't know why we wouldn't send black people into like the colleges and turn them woke instead of.
Actually, no, but that's actually interesting. I'm glad you brought up college, because if you look factually speaking, Americans are getting dumber and dumber and dumber and dumber, and yet we have never handed out more degrees, which is interesting. Like, I mean,
when you say Americans are getting dumber, what do you mean?
What I mean, I mean, talking about in terms of passing tests, passing exams, the literacy level in America, everything is actually going down. And like SAT scores, everything is going down. And which is why they're now like, let's just abolish the SAT, the sort of a thing that they're.
Okay. So right out the gate, we have a very big claim here. Americans are getting dumber and dumber, even though we're handing out more college degrees. Now, a big issue that I have with what Owens is saying relates to the content of what she's saying, yes, and I'll kind of get to that, but also to the way that she's framing the question and the problem to begin with here. Now, I do want to give some charity to my interpretation of Owens, because this is happening within the middle of a kind of a informal conversation. It does get, as you can tell, it is getting a little bit heated, and obviously Owens and Destiny are coming from two different political places, so they each kind of have their own axe to grind. But this is an informal conversation. It's not necessarily that, I mean, Owens is presenting a type of argument, but in these sorts of conversations, people aren't always super careful with what they're saying. So I will give her a little bit of wiggle room here, but it's really unclear what she's getting at. And the problem throughout the conversation is the vagueness of who exactly she's referring to. So to begin with, we have this general claim that Americans are getting dumber and dumber. It's not exactly clear what she means by dumber. Based off the context of the conversation, it seems that she's referring to literacy rates. which raises a really big question, and that is, where is she getting this information from? On the whole, there's an upward trajectory of literacy rates. People are typically more literate. Now, there is some issues with that, and this might be what she's referring to. But let me clarify a little bit of what I'm talking about. So, yeah, literacy rates have typically tended to increase since we started measuring literacy rates. There's been a issue recently over the past 5 years, over the past three. When did COVID happen? Was it 2020, early 2020, February, March 2020? What we have been tracking specifically, though, and this is where it gets a little confusing within the K through 12 system, within the public school system, they have been tracking the impact of that long break that kids took from school. There's a big conversation within the educational community over the impact that COVID had on kids, specifically kids within elementary school, grades 1 through 5, the impact that that had on their education. And what some studies are showing is that they are kind of falling behind, so to speak, from previous generations. And what in education, what we mean by falling behind is that their test scores are getting lower. So that might be what Owens is referring to, but she is specifically framing this with respect to college students. So in that case, I don't know what she's talking about. It would be nice if she would provide a reference, and I don't expect people to have a direct reference to a peer-reviewed article that they're talking about, but maybe a reference to the institution that carried out the study that she's referring to. But the implication here is that, and she'll kind of get to this later, that college degrees themselves, or the college education itself, is making people dumber. Again, I can see that if she was going to make the argument that COVID specifically had a negative impact on children's educational levels. That's not super controversial, and there is data to back that up. But to say that it's college and completely ignoring the COVID break that happened, that's the part that's confusing, and that's the whole reason why I made this video. So anyway, let's continue.
Which I think they've gotten rid of and brought back in some places. But I mean, like, I don't know if the same people getting illiterate are the same people that are going to college and getting degrees.
Yeah, we're handing out degrees, and yet people think they're educated when actually they're just brainwashed bots, and they're quite stupid. They are stupid, and that's the magic of a college degree, is that it makes people think that they're smart, right? And it's astonishing. You really should examine that, how every decade within America people are getting dumber and dumber and dumber. And one of the things that my colleague Matt Walsh did, which is really incredible, is
Okay, so Destiny's point here is a really good one. Is it the people who are getting the college degrees, are their literacy rates going down? Which would support what Owens is saying, that there's something that's happening in college that's decreasing literacy rates. But up until this point, she's been very vague about what exactly she's referring to here, what exactly is causing, or even speculation about the cause or the decline of literacy rates. But she seems to be suggesting that college is the primary cause. And if that's true, to Destiny's point, there should be obvious data that's showing that there's something happening within the colleges that is causing this. Instead of an actual response to that, what we see is a pivot by Owens of falling back on this popular, I'm going to call this a conspiracy. It's a conspiracy because I believe there's an attribution of malevolent motives to colleges or to teachers, but there's this, it's very vague, so it's very difficult to pin down, but there's this idea that colleges are kind of indoctrination camps, that people go to college and receive liberal indoctrination. I call that a conspiracy because there's an assumption there that there are people behind the scenes who are intentionally attempting to deceive people. And that's where the conspiratorial part comes in. Maybe you don't like that label. If so, you don't have to use it. But Owen's suggestion is that it's because of this brainwashing that literacy rates are declining. And the brainwashing, again, it seems to be this the liberal agenda that these colleges are pushing. But Destiny, again, that was a really good question, a good point that he should have kind of came back to and harped on more, because what she's saying would theoretically be measurable and ought to have been measured at this point.
He read a letter that was written by a civil rights soldier who's like,
I think she means Civil War, if I'm thinking of what she's referring to, but minor detail there.
17 years old or 18 years old, had no education, and it sounded like poetry, like unbelievable the way people used to be able to speak and write before we created the Department of Education, which in my view, it is there just to exist to turn you into a mindless bot that will serve the government's interests.
I mean, we can say that, but the reality.
Okay, so she talks about college institutions as being institutions of brainwashing, creating mindless bots that are just there to serve the government. This combined with the claim that every decade people are getting dumber. And then at the tail end, she kind of relates that back to and places the blame on the Department of Education. So, as an educator, I'm not always the biggest fan of the Department of Education. Specifically, what I take issue with in the modern educational system is the over-standardization. I don't know if that's the word. The overuse of standardized tests and standardized testing in the learning environment. I find that problematic for a few reasons. One is the standardized testing companies and the relationships between the school system and the Department of Education and the lobbyists that they have behind all of that. That's a major cause of concern for me. But also what standardized testing does to education. Now I will admit that I have a very, let's say, idealized view of education, but over standardization, and maybe this is a point that Owens is trying to raise, but just goes about it in a different way than I would go about it. This over standardization kind of sucks the soul out of education. The emphasis that's placed on memorization and on formulaic thinking kind of dulls and doesn't emphasize more creative thinking and critical thinking that maybe we would like to see more of in society. So in that sense, I do kind of agree, although I don't know if that's the point she's making. So maybe I shouldn't say that I agree with her here. But yeah, I do take issue with a lot of things in modern education because I work in modern education. And so I see a lot of those issues. But there's a bit of a double standard in what she just said, because if you remember at the very beginning of when I started the video, she's measuring the dumbification, definitely not a word. She's saying that Americans are getting dumber and dumber, and she's saying that the way that we know that is because of the decrease of test scores, which seems to suggest that she wants people to get better at test scores. She wants test scores to increase, but then she's turning right around and saying, placing the blame on the Department of Education. So there's a bit of, if you don't want the Department of Education, then don't measure intelligence or don't measure the success of students in schools by standardized testing. You can't really have it both ways, I suppose, is the point I'm trying to make there, if that makes sense. Okay, so we're going to skip ahead a little bit. Destiny's going to talk a little bit about worker productivity and how that relates or doesn't relate to education, but they're going to come back to this whole discussion about literacy, which we'll pick up on.
To make people the most literate by sending them to college and have them read.
They're not the most literate. That's what I'm telling you. They are not the most literate.
You think people that graduate with college degrees can't read well?
Yeah, what I'm telling you is yes. That's what I'm telling you. They're not the most literate.
What would I look up to verify that if I wanted to see, like,
you got to do the research in your own time.
I have done the research.
Like, I'm happy to.
A lot to unpack there. So people who graduate with college degrees are not the most literate. Again, this is a measurable statement, and the Department of Education and other institutions within the United States are very, very interested in these numbers. Now, I did a little bit of research because, again, I'm sort of remotely curious about this. Now, I am by no means an expert on literacy in education, and I really haven't done that much research, but I was curious to see if there's any data to support what Owens was saying here. Let me say that most of the research that I've been presented with in my educational training is, again, typically related in the K through 12 system, and most of it had to do with the impact of the pandemic on children's education specifically. Now, I did, however, find a survey that was done by the National Institute of American College Students, and this is the data that they show based off of their research. Not sure if that's super visible to you. Let me see. I'll link this in the description of this video. You can read the report for yourself. It's pretty lengthy. But if you can see this chart, you might have to squint your eyes a little bit. This red bar shows students who graduated from four-year programs, the stripe bar from students that graduated from two-year programs, community colleges, and the solid color peach color bar, is that peach color bar, is people who did not go to college. And what the data indicates is that people who did go to college do have higher literacy rates. Now, this is an older study. It's the most recent one I can find, but it's coming from 2006. So maybe there's more recent data that would suggest otherwise. I am wide open to that. I don't really have a big stake of this on this question. I don't really have a horse in this race. So if you're watching this and you do know of more recent data from legitimate, maybe best peer-reviewed sources, please post that in the comment section below. I am interested, so I will read it. So the data actually seems to suggest otherwise, and a big part of why I made this video is, yes, I'm interested, but also is in this last comment that Owens made really, really bothers me, where she tells Destiny, I don't know, you need to do your own research. As someone who teaches critical thinking, this is a highly, highly problematic statement. So Owens went into this interview, obviously, Destiny, when they're talking about politics, Destiny, somebody sitting on the opposite aisle of Owens, there's going to be some major disagreement between the two on certain key issues. It sounded like, as she said in the beginning, that this is a topic that she wanted to talk about. When you're presented with these sorts of difficult conversations and you're speaking with somebody who you know ahead of time doesn't agree with you, when you put forth evidence, you need to come with receipts, so to speak. You need to come with sources to back up the claims that you're making. This, of course, adds legitimacy to what you're saying. If you believe that college students are becoming less literate, you need to provide information for why you think that. To respond to, no matter what you're talking about, to respond to somebody who disagrees with you with, I don't know, go do your own research, is incredibly, well, condescending for one, dismissive for two, and it's not their responsibility to do the research. If you're the one making a claim, if you're the one putting forth a proposition, you need to have a reason for why you're making that argument in the first place. It's not like this is some casual conversation in which Owens is talking about her like casual beliefs. Well, I think this could possibly be true. Or I think it's likely that this is no, she's saying people are getting dumber. That's a very bold claim. Well, what reason, what evidence do you have to believe that? Because it seems like you're founding a lot of your ideas upon that. So you need a very strong support and a very strong foundation for those claims. And to pawn that off on your interlocutor to say, well, no, it's your responsibility, is very disingenuous, dishonest, and not productive in these sorts of conversations. Anyway, I wanted to keep this video relatively short. I plan on making another one about the conversation that continues shortly after this about the value of a college education and whether or not people should actually go to college, but I'll split those into two videos. Thank you for joining me. Let me know what you think about college literacy rates, or about what Owens is saying, or about this strange idea that people have that colleges are intentionally trying to make people dumber. Do you agree, disagree? Do you see where Owens is coming from, maybe let me know in the comment section below, and I'll see you all next time.